right. So there is a link for a document in the invite or the calendar item. And it looks like Dan, you're in there. So today we're just going to go over a few of the highlights of, different dates and things that occur throughout a milestone, how that fits into this whole weekly release system, and really how you can tell where things are. Is it still in development? Is it on production? Is it on staging? Is it going to make a certain week's release, a certain month's release? And so the overarching idea is that it's anyone that wants to know the status of a given issue, you should just be able to look at the issue. There's the workflow labels, which we've started to see on all of them. And that'll give a sort of at a glance status. But the real takeaway is that if the issue is open, it's not on production. So the methodology that we're supposed to follow, which is fairly recent, which is why I think there is some of this confusion, is that the issue should not close until it's been verified on gitlab.com. And so that's a fairly recent change, but that's sort of moving forward, at least what I'm going to be following and what I think we should be following as a team. I think it is outlined in a few of the documents that I might have linked further down here. So really what we'll end up kind of going over is more, if you wanted to dig in a little bit further than that to maybe, the developer side of things and understand, we've got the product dates that we go through that have the milestones of, this is when the milestone should be planned by, this is when we have the little kickoff meeting and all of that. But there's also sort of a set of dates that the developers and engineers are following. And so that's what I figured I would kind of walk through for everyone's information, and hopefully it'll give an idea of when things happen on the weekly rollouts and monthly rollouts, and generally how that flows. Does that sound good? Cool. All right. So I linked the product important dates that you're probably pretty familiar with. That's just for reference. And then in the engineering workflow, those dates are kind of mirrored there as well with a few additional pieces. But really, we'll jump right into the workflow labels, which is also part of that engineering workflow page. And so if you click on that, you'll see a breakdown of the overall flow of what is expected of an engineer when they're working on a merge request. And so the idea is that when a developer starts working on a merge request, in the actual issue, as well as the merge request, a label should be added saying that it is in development. And this just means that, hopefully someone is actively writing code. And there could be more than one merge request. And so that's why it's important to also have those labels in each individual merge request. The in review label is once the merge requests are in review, the label will change from in development to in review. And this includes all of the steps of the review process. So the initial reviewer, a database review if it's necessary, the maintainer review, and all of the back and forth with feedback in between. There is one additional label that I didn't list in the Google Doc here, which is blocked. And so that would come up specifically if somewhere along the line in any of these processes, something happens and it's completely blocked by another issue or another, something else that's going on, to the point where like no more work can be done and we need to wait for someone or something to happen. And usually there'll be a comment linked to that. I don't think we've seen that come up yet on the package team.
Steve, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
This is all really helpful. We should be using these labels. I actually just talked to Jason, my boss just asked me today if we were following this process, and I said no. But we should be doing, like right now, things that are in 12.4, for example, should be set from my perspective with ready for review or ready for development or something like that. Like there's other And then once you start developing, that's when you put it in workflow in dev. Okay.
Right. Is there a sort of like a ready for development already? I mean, is that kind of what the deliverable tag sort of stands for? Is that this is sort of like part of the milestone and it's ready to be worked on?
I see a workflow ready for development tag. Yeah. And then I guess deliverable is that's like another version of that, because the deliverable tag will basically make it so it shows up on our strategy and direction page and on our kickoff documents.
Are those two meant to be the same thing? Are we going to go to some standardized workflow tag for deliverable, or is that just going to always stay, for your understanding, Tim?
I have to look up the answer to that. I'm learning about this as Steve's talking about it, and also trying to read along.
And it looks like, so actually I wasn't even aware, it looks like a whole bunch of new workflow labels have been created recently. So the ready for development, production, scheduled, and canary are all pretty new, like maybe very new. They're not reflected in that engineering workflow document yet, at least. But yeah, that totally makes sense that we can set things as ready for development and so on from there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm realizing that Dan and John were just going through the new milestone, and there was some labeling, like things weren't labeled or were labeled, and so I think this is really helpful for me, just to agree upon, like, okay, this is what we should be labeling issues and how it should be done. So okay, I'll stop my interruption. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out. I didn't even realize that those existed yet. So that's good to know.
There's work as well, because I think the problem comes with the like in production sort of in canary kind of labeling. I think I had an issue from Marin's team a while ago for this. I mean, they might be getting around to it. My suggestion was like, how do you know that's ready to go? I was hoping that we'd end up with a bot that would do that for you. So you wouldn't have to be like, did it get there? Did it get there? Boop, and then change it. So I'm not sure if that's part of this effort, but I'd have to go look at the weekend review, I guess, to figure out whether there was some effort to add these workflow labels. The new ones, that is, not the existing ones. In dev, and then in review, and then the other one we have as well is those ones should all be pretty familiar and being actively used right now. Where is it? Yeah, verification is the other one.
Yep, and verification is also one that has been kind of foggy for a lot of people, I think, because it wasn't fully written out. But verification means that the maintainer has merged it into the master branch, and it will show up on staging soon after. Usually, I think we push to staging daily, so it takes about a day after the merge. And then once it's merged on master, it needs to be verified on staging and then again on production. So in verification means that it's not just being verified on staging, but being verified all the way through, unless there are some possibly new labels that are on that list. Yeah, it looks like actually that might be different now. Looking at these labels, we've got workflow verification, there's workflow canary. And so that would be after it's been verified on staging, it would go to canary. And then after it's been on canary, then it would go to production. And so then once it's on production, that's the point at which the issue should be closed. So it looks like actually there are new workflow labels that will help, kind of help understand where things are as long as they are up to date. I think it'll be something that we might want to remind the rest of our team of, especially since there are these new ones that, I'm just seeing for the first time as well. Yeah, any other comments about those labels? Cool.
Were you saying they're not in the workflow document for general?
Yeah, they aren't. At least not yet. I mean, I would bet that there's probably an MR in process of updating this documentation if those are brand new, but we can point them out at some point. I think the important ones are certainly in dev, in review, and verification for right now, since those are the ones that are listed on that document.
All right, cool.
So then digging into sort of the different dates and how they revolve around Milestone as well as the weekly releases. This is kind of taken from the developer point of view. So sort of the dates that I'm kind of paying attention to as I'm working every month. And so when it comes to the milestones, milestones are tied specifically to the self-managed releases. Since everything else, I mean, everything's getting rolled out week to week. So certainly we're tracking issues as they're going through a milestone, but you know, an issue can be pushed out to GitLab.com on any given week. It could be at the beginning of the next milestone, at the end of the next milestone, and it's prioritized to be within a milestone, but it's a little bit more difficult to keep track. So when it comes to the specific milestones, from the development standpoint, development begins on the 8th of each month and ends on the 7th of the next month. That was previously when there was the code freeze. And that's no longer really a thing. So it's kind of like a soft end of work on the 7th. There's nothing preventing you from continuing work. There's no hard cutoff anymore. But as a general idea, it's suggested that all work that's not yet in review by the 7th should be pushed off of that milestone. And since the next one's already planned, it should go into the one after. So it should skip one. So if you're working on 12.0, the 7th hits and there's a piece of it that you haven't started or that you haven't gotten into review yet, it should get pushed to 12.2. There's some wiggle room there, as I mentioned, because it's no longer a hard date with these weekly rollouts. But the idea of that is to help keep things organized and prevent things from slowly stacking up and making it very difficult to finish any given milestone and taking away time from the next milestone.
And so just to confirm, if something is not in review by the 7th, then it should be moved back. And if something is not merged by the 18th, then it misses the milestone. And for GitLab.com, no big deal because it'll go out in the next week. But for self-managed, it will wait a whole milestone. Okay.
Exactly. And I keep like not understanding whether it's the 17th or 18th. I think it's like kind of over the last few months, it's been the 17th and then the 18th, and it's kind of switched back and forth on what is the actual hard cutoff for getting into the self managed release. And I think that's just because they're still kind of refining this process. But yeah, that is the general idea, is that like technically you could keep developing all the way up until the 17th, but that's, you know, the whole time of that is you're supposed to be working on the next milestone at that point. So if something's in review and you're just kind of working through feedback, then that makes sense. But if you're just kind of still doing the initial work to get it into review, it's probably the best to push it off.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep, and so yeah, that kind of is what I just covered there. Is the 17th is the final merge from the auto deploy branch that will go to self-managed release, which occurs on the 22nd. So from the development standpoint, there's not a lot of like hard dates involved really outside of those final release dates. It's sort of just a lot of guidelines at this point because of the weekly rollouts now. So to kind of dig into the weekly rollouts, so whenever I finish a merge request and it has been merged into master, so it's part of the verification workflow now, there's automatic QA issues that open up that I don't think you would normally see. And they just have a list of all of the MRs from all of the back end and front end work and it shows who wrote the MR, and there's a little checkbox next to it. And the idea is that now it's on staging and it needs to be verified. And so those issues open for 12 hours, and either you verified it before it even opened, or you see that and it reminds you that you should check to make sure your work is up on staging and that it works properly. And once you verified it, you click the checkbox, and that has flagged it, so it will go on the next auto deploy to Canary and then production. If it isn't checked, it'll just kind of keep going into the next QA issue that gets opened a day or two later. And those are open just like continuously as people are pushing out work. So on Thursday or Friday, and this was another one that's kind of like, it changes week to week, but the final QA issue is generated, and anything that is not verified on that issue will not be included on Monday's release. The Monday release is also very iffy. It is done manually, so it happens at various times. Sometimes it hasn't occurred until Tuesday, and I'll show you where you can kind of see those things happening if you have an interest in seeing like kind of what the status is of those things.
So there are multiple QA issues that'll be opened up throughout the week, but they're all leading towards that same next Monday release. It's kind of like your chance to authenticate with Google Authenticator. Like you could make this one, and if not, you still can catch the next one.
Yep. And okay. For each one of those, anything that gets checked off on the Monday's issue, it'll probably end up on Canary on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. At least that's how I understand it. I don't take my word for 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure that every one of those mini releases will end up on Canary, and then they all get merged together for the final push to production on Monday. And so the next few sections, I do have some notes that I had written out for how to check if something is live on production. That was not easy to do, and how to check if a certain auto deploy is currently being deployed. However, just this morning, right after I finished writing all this on Slack, Marin announced that there is a new ChatOps tool if you scroll to the bottom of the document. And so you can use ChatOps to check what version GitLab.com, Canary, and staging are running, which will show what of those auto deploy branches are being run. And then there's a secondary command where you run auto deploy status on a given hash, so like the final commit of a merge request. And it will show you which environments that is live on. So for the example that I posted, that screenshot, that specific commit is live on GitLab.com, Canary, and staging. So that makes things super easier to be able to check in the future. I don't know if you have ChatOps access. I just requested it. But really, I think when it comes down to it, if you're curious about one of these things, you should probably be asking whoever was working on it, and then I should be the one, pulling up my commit hash and doing all of that work to check it. At least in my mind, that's how it probably should work.
That's a really cool feature. If I could see that being very useful, because I could just, if I had ChatOps access, I could just look at it, then click on the link for which commit we're on, and then see if our changes are included in that commit.
Yep.
If possible. And if not, then that's what you would do when I ask you if that's possible. But I should try and get ChatOps permission, maybe, even if they don't let me, at least I could try. And this way I don't have to, the less I have to bug you, the better, probably.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, it's more of whether or not it's a hassle for you to look up the commit hash, or if I happen to have it on hand. But either way, yeah, it looks like this will save a lot of time compared to the previous one that I had described up above that we don't have to go through, of where you have to kind of manually go through that process to see where it is. But does that kind of answer the questions of how those weekly releases sort of flow from one to the next and how that fits into that milestone every month?
Yeah, I think this is really helpful. I'll probably go back and rewatch this video another time, but yeah, I think generally I have a much better sense of how it works. It does make me think that, myself included, I haven't really been using the workflow board that we have, and I'm not sure how widely adopted that is now, but it sounds like we should definitely be using that.
Yeah, I've tried to keep my issues up with those 3 labels. And it looks like we'll be able to add a few more to provide a little bit more visibility on where things are. Yeah, we should definitely be using that. And I think I did add that to the actual like 12. What are we on right now? 12.3?
12.3, yeah.
Yeah, I think on the 12.3 board, I added the lists for each of those. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and there's nothing in any of them.
Okay, yeah, because maybe what we need is that board to be expanded to include all of the workflow stuff. And then this way we could see, I don't know, I guess I need to visualize it first, and I'll test it out and send some stuff around. Because I do think it's helpful, like there's stuff in 12.6 or 12.7 that we're not really, they're not ready to work on, and they're my current way of doing is assigning them to me. But I could add in that product label that says like validation or workflow validation or whichever one that could help move things through.
Cool.
Okay.
One other thing that, like, while I was kind of going through this and coming up with this info and making sure I kind of had these ideas correct, was it almost didn't make sense that, I mean, it does make sense that we have these sort of monthly dates to do the self-managed releases, but at the same time, like that whole idea where, trying to end work on the 7th that isn't yet in review and pushing that off, that kind of is the opposite of what the week-to-week flow is trying to help with. And so, like, I get that the week-to-week flow, if you keep just like, falling and letting things slip week to week, eventually you could fall an entire milestone behind if you just kind of like keep pushing it back. And so that's why the idea of pushing work on the 7th to a different milestone makes sense. But it was kind of almost making me think that, like, does it make sense to be doing the monthly milestones as we do now, like, given that we have these monthly releases? And I know that that's certainly a product thing with, you plan a month's worth of milestone. So I don't know. That's just something I was kind of thinking about, where, like, could it just be a continuous flow of work, and then every month on the 17th, whatever gets in, and you just continuously prioritize a list going on?
I mean,
It's almost
that's
like,
that's what we've been doing, which is like, my read so far has been we are trying to adapt our development workflow to give us more time to write code and less time trying to wait for stuff. I've been trying to work forward with the sense that, like, hey, let's prioritize a list, make sure we're like working towards that, and a bunch of other engineering managers are sort of following the same strategy. So I think I'm happy to actually try being very, like, completely do exactly what's on the workflow diagram and just see how it works. But given how small we are and how much we've got to do and all those sorts of things, I've been leaning in the other direction for the most part. What were you going to say, Tim? Sorry.
well, I'll just echo what you said there, to say Jason mentioned he's the same thing for his teams today. So release and verify are sort of using it, sort of not, and it's not really been widely adopted throughout the company yet. So we're not laggards in that sense, although we can do more, I'm sure. I think for me, like, the goal of the milestone is, when we met with a big customer last week, and we went over one of the epics, and it has all of the issues, and they're put in milestones, and they could follow along that epic and see that. It's very helpful for them to be able to put that in mind, to be able to say, oh, okay, that's going to launch in 12.6, 6. That looks cool. That looks good. Even though those dates are unreliable, even though they may get it sooner, even though it may change, it's like there's still some value in that. But if we could solve that problem, like maybe, and then we use it for the kickoff document in the blog, which is a way of announcing things in bundles. But really, if we could solve the bundling problem and maybe skip some of the heavier weight planning for milestone stuff, maybe that could be something that we could do. I don't know. I just a thought. I think there's something there that we could do, but I'm just not sure what it is.
Yeah, I've been sort of, you and I talked a bit about this yesterday, Tim, in terms of like planning. And I've been sort of tiptoeing around some of these subjects just because I feel like we could easily get into a situation where we're just spending a lot of time doing bureaucratic stuff and not as much time writing code and getting results, which is our top value, which is why I think a lot of teams kind of end up doing some version of this depending on the team's makeup and what they're working on and how well defined it is. And we get a fair amount of autonomy as how we, in terms of how we plan all that stuff out. So I would just say, I think looking at the labeling, that's the biggest thing that I see here that I think is super valuable, is like this workflow labeling. I just set up a workflow board. It was like 2 seconds, so you can all look at that. I think I ordered them correctly based on your explanation and the guesstimate on some of these extra labels that are just appearing. I think that this labeling is generally something I've used in the past in Jira or whatever, where it's like, okay, what state are each of these things in? And we could easily add some other things to this to limit down the scope of this actual board, because it's obviously a lot of stuff right now. But I think my suggestion or my intent here has always been to sort of minimize the overhead and let people just work as much as possible, which is why I've said to Steve and you, Tim, just like, hey, let's get a prioritized list of the stuff we need to deliver. Let's prioritize that work and make sure we're delivering what we commit to deliver. And then as we realize, hey, there's a gap here, let's go look at the workflow, look at the guidance from the team, from GitLab, and like go do that. So kind of that's where my head's been at. But I think this is very helpful. And I love these labels. And I think we should identify areas where we think there's a problem to look for solutions. I don't know if I'm helping someone stop talking.
I think that's all really good. So I guess, like, are we leaning towards maybe we shouldn't pay as close attention to the idea? Like, as you said, we haven't been paying very close attention to the idea of, on that 7th or 8th, push everything up a milestone or two. Should we just kind of, so are we going to kind of keep with that flow of, just keep working on what we're working on and just work down the list?
I'm good. I think it could be worth trying, Tim. Up to you whether you feel like it'll be helpful or not, to sort of, instead of just pushing everything into the next milestone, to actually push it into the following milestone. I'm happy to try that. I think the risk here, as you mentioned, Steve, is that there's the potential to end up like a whole milestone behind because we just keep missing this and missing that. And so I think this is maybe the second, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is maybe the second milestone that we've actually kind of gone through and gone, oh, okay, we've got leftover stuff here. What do we do with it? How do we then allocate it? I think having a hard and fast rule here may not serve us well, but I'm happy to try it. I'm happy to sort of look at stuff that doesn't get completed for whatever reason, and then just go, okay, well, this didn't get completed, move it to 12.4 or 12.5, whatever the 1 or 2 out is. I think that's kind of an arbitrary way to change our priorities, though. And that's kind of my main concern, because the emphasis for me has always been, let's figure out what our priorities are and focus on those. And those priorities don't change because we didn't hit the 7th or the 17th. We still are supposed to deliver that thing next and put our effort into that thing. And so whilst Tim determines that that's our next most important thing, that should be where we spend our energy. Right? And that's my main concern about having this, like, well, we didn't get it, so it's going in 1-2 milestones down the track. It still may be our top priority, but that's a determination that I've sort of maybe to a fault left to Tim to decide.
I think that's good, because what I've been doing is saying once it does get moved, I then go into the board and move things around. So like, for instance, some of the, like if Conan slipped, I put Conan to the top of the list in 12.3 because that still is the most important thing to finish for 12.3. So I think if we move it over, that's fine because I'm still constantly doing this like ordering and reordering process. So we will always have the most important things scheduled in the given milestone.
I think
But
part of it also is sort of where they are in terms of development. Like for example, like with Conan, like it's not something I'd want to say, okay, I'll stop for a month and work on something else, because that would just like kill the entire
Context, yeah.
yeah. I'd have to
Yeah.
like start relearning it from scratch and figure out what I did previously. But there probably are some things that that don't follow that rule, and obviously stuff that hasn't yet been touched is sort of in its own category as well.
a good example might be like if a front end thing that Nick is working on and making this front end change, but then you finish Conan and Conan's ready to go in the front end. Like, okay, well, that's going to be more important for him to do. And maybe that other stuff he was working on, maybe that could actually wait.
Yeah. So I need to bail. I actually have another meeting. But the thing I wanted to say is let's take an action item out of this to say at a minimum, we ought to be looking at what we're moving, what we're not completing in a milestone. We just had a conversation about this actually yesterday evening and sort of followed up on it a little bit more. So that we can actually evaluate it. And Steve, you're welcome to join those meetings. I don't think any meeting I have is private. I don't even care if people win my one-on-ones, to be honest. It doesn't matter to me. But like, and I'm thinking about doing that, by the way. But like, then actually have a look at, okay, what are we going to miss here? And then how do we then reprioritize it? And maybe Steve, you could sit in that and understand it and give feedback on what you think is not making sense. Or maybe we're just, it might be good to get some feedback for both of us on that. But let's schedule. I meant to go through the list of issues that we have open and that were pulled over from 12.2 into 12.3. And so I still need to do that. So maybe that can form the basis of it. Do either of you want to schedule a meeting for that, or do you want me to do it? Or what do we think? Because we already reprioritized them, right, Tim?
Yeah, I think let's wait until 12.3.
Yeah, okay, that works for me. All right. We're going to be a little bit more prescriptive about the use of the missed the milestone labels, by the way. So I've sort of made a request of Tim that we don't move anything. And if we miss 70% of what we committed to, then we're going to see it and it's going to be in everything. So I'm concerned that we don't have a clear idea of the velocity. So I'm still going to go look through all the issues that we moved, and Tim gave me a good rundown of what they were already. And we have good explanations as to why, but I think that's going to be something we need to be looking at. Let's schedule a meeting for the end of at the 17th, is it, when we're supposed to stop? Or do you want to schedule that closer to the 22nd, Tim?
Well, I guess it's the 7th.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess.
My bad. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do for the 8th, and then we could say, okay, are we moving this stuff to the next milestone, and why? I think that's when we would make that decision.
It's like a milestone retro, and it's like a more specific issue-based milestone retro that we do and figure out what's going.
I like that idea. We can visit what's gonna make it, what's not, and whether or not it pushes other stuff out of the next milestone or gets pushed to a further milestone.
All right. Do you feel like that's something you own in terms of the process, Tim, or do you want me to own that?
Good question. I don't know. What do you think?
I think anything to do with priorities is yours.
Yeah, but then a lot of
times, right?
Yeah, and well, what if we used our weekly Monday morning meeting and we just had on that whatever the 8th is, as soon as we for next week it would be on the 9th, and we do it then, and then the following month.
I don't want to keep using those Monday meetings. It's risky because if we have other things we need to cover, then we just end up like rushing everything and we don't do a good job of any of it. So I'd prefer to have a separate retro meeting, and let's just trial it. I'll set up a meeting. Let's just trial it for this month, and we'll do that. Our meeting's about to end, so we only get 10 minutes over, and that's it. So I'll set that meeting up today.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Steve. That was awesome. It was very helpful.